Can I let you in on a little secret? Mountain Gazette 202 is going to sell out probably before the holidays, which means that if you're listening to this, you've got a head start to go grab a copy. So head to mountaingazette.com/subscribe, grab a subscription, add the current issue, get our new cover designed by the wonderful magazine legend Harry Bliss. I think his Mountain Gazette cover is his best yet. Read what's inside. Enjoy the podcast while you're waiting for the magazine to arrive. Once again, that's mountaingazette.com. Thanks.
The magazine is our brand expression. It represents fully the intention, the thoughtfulness, the pillars of the brand 100%. And everything needs to be the best that it can be because it's permanent. We're not a monthly magazine. You don't flip through it, throw it away. Everything we do is meant to be collectible. And I want the brand to be around for more than just a season, for more than just a year. And what I value the most about creating a print product is this idea of endurance and of longevity.
The pandemic hit New York first and harder and longer than most places. And as a New Yorker, Joshua Glass was appalled by the eerily quiet and empty city that resulted. He wanted to connect with people, any people, but he wanted quality gatherings as opposed to quantity. When restrictions on gatherings began to ease up, he started curating a series of dinner parties around town. And these get-togethers led to the creation of Family Style, a media brand that brought all his interests under a single and perhaps singular cultural umbrella. The result is, finally, what the people at those highly curated and probably well-dressed dinner parties talked about. And the magazine is the core of a growing brand that encompasses production, events, digital, and social. Family Style is a magazine at the intersection of food and culture, an interesting magazine about interesting people interested in interesting things, all united by a kind of global glossy aesthetic. So is Family Style a fashion magazine, a culture magazine, a food magazine, or an arts journal? The answer is 100% yes. My name is Arjun Basu, and this is The Full Bleed.
So Josh, the pandemic and supper clubs, tell the story.
Yeah. So like everyone, the pandemic changed my life completely. I remember I was in Milan when we first started hearing about what was happening. And at the time I worked for a different fashion magazine. And my colleague and I had this moment where we looked at each other right after the Prada show and we thought, is this going to be anything? And I try to be an optimist, even though I think I'm a realist. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, we're here for 15 days. We got to do it. We got to make the most of our budget. We have to do our jobs. We have to go to shows. So we went to Paris and one by one, all of our colleagues started going back. But we stayed to the end of Paris Fashion Week. I viscerally remember being at the Louis Vuitton show, which is the last show of Paris Fashion Week, and looking around the show setup, and half the typical showgoers were there. And I was like, okay, something is really happening. When we got back to New York, that's when the city started shutting down. The world started shutting down. And at the time I lived in a very tiny studio apartment in the Lower East Side in an area now infamously known as Dime Square. When I moved there, it was very hip. It was very cool. People were outside all the time, smoking weed, eating food, hanging out, getting drunk. And throughout the pandemic, it was silence. The whole city was silent. Everyone had to stay inside. I remember going on mental health walks for an hour at a time and just honestly, I couldn't even vocalize the sadness and the awkwardness of being in a city that was shut down and a city like New York that's constantly congested. So being alone, I lived alone, being alone in a very small space, I started rethinking what food meant to me, what a lot of things meant to me, right? I started rethinking my relationship with fashion, with fitness, with health, with my family, but food, because when you live alone, everything you do in terms of upkeep has to be efficient. I can't make a meal for 10 people if I live alone because then you waste 9 people's foods. And I started cooking very differently. I started experimenting with what I was making, but also questioning what was my relationship with food. Growing up, I'm from Houston, Texas. Both my parents are immigrants. I was raised with my mom. My mom is a refugee from Vietnam. She came over to the States sponsored by the Catholic Church from Vietnam. And then she moved. That's where she studied. She's a translator, a linguist. So she has a very interesting relationship with food because Vietnamese food, which is what we grew up with, represented her homeland And then the small little changes or evolutions she would make to her dishes, be they French, be they German, represent the places that she lived in, almost like a edible scrapbook of her life. And so for me, as a multiracial uh, son of a single mother who had never been to Vietnam, and I don't look Vietnamese, the food that I grew up with, Vietnamese food, was always a sort of taste of something far away that I never really understood, but also knew really well. And so when I came to New York, I had that sort of around me. I was a student. I came here for college. I went to NYU. I was truly, when I say broke, I was like the definition of broke. I think I had $300 when I moved to New York, and I spent $200 at IKEA buying like a blanket, literally, and like one pot. And so I learned the city by eating dollar pizzas and $2 falafel. That's how I literally survived. And when I finally had enough money, I go to Trader Joe's, which is the cheapest grocery store, to buy frozen food that I would make, right? Eventually, as I left college, started working, grew in my professional career, food became a very different access point to culture for me. Going to Michelin star rated restaurants, going to private dinners, understanding that food can also be a gate to high culture, right? So all this was brewing. And then during the pandemic, which was your original question, I was exploring all of this. Food is a gateway to a lot of things. When you're home with nothing, what does food mean to you? And on one hand, I started making the recipes of the Vietnamese food I grew up with. On one hand, I started experimenting, right? I made stupid banana bread. I made those silly little cookies, the almond cookies that everyone loves. I loved it. And I gained a lot of weight. And I was like, I got to stop doing this. But the whole point was I was looking at what food meant to me. And I was also watching how everyone else around the world was doing the exact same thing. My entire life pre-COVID, I always thought TikTok was a silly app for dancing. And it very much is that, but it also is a portal to creation, to creators, to ideas. And I know it's been a hugely important vehicle for a lot of non-professional chefs to understand that you can still be a chef and not work in a professional setting. And I was watching, let's say, stay-at-home moms. I was watching young culinary students. I was watching bankers cooking on TikTok, understanding that whatever you were doesn't define who you are. While I was seeing all of these things, I was also missing my friends. I primarily have used dinner as a way to get together with people. I live in New York City. It's constantly chaotic. My schedule is, let's say, nauseous. And dinner specifically is really the time that you can see people, right? Meet new people, catch up with old friends, talk about work, talk about love, talk about everything in between. And so when the pandemic finally ended, or I guess halfway through the pandemic, when we were finally able to eat outside again and we had our restrictions lifted, I would have these pseudo dinner parties just at restaurants or in the park. And dinners are always a really lovely way to entertain, but it's also a great way to see how we are as humans. And when the pandemic was finally over, I doubled down on food, and I think I have gone out to dinner every night since the pandemic. But yeah, the whole experience really changed the way I looked at the idea of community, of coming together, of communion, and of food's ability to foster all of that. And so I have personally, professionally, everything in between, used these dinners as a way to meet people, as a way to talk about bigger concepts, bigger issues, female productive rights, racial issues, philosophy, etc. But also small things like, oh my God, did you watch Succession? Or what music are you listening to? That's the really lovely thing about a dinner party. You can talk about deep philosophical debates, and then you can pivot and talk about something silly like flatware. But the sort of spectrum of conversation is what I love about these sort of moments. And when I was starting to conceive my own publication, having worked at some of the best magazines, I realized that creating a dinner, fostering a dinner, hosting a dinner is a very similar sort of mental space as curating and editing and publishing a magazine, right? You have to think about it, of course, like it's not a one-to-one parallel, but you have to think about a lot of different factors. How do people and ideas and concepts sit next to each other? What if it's literally at a dinner table or conceptually in pages? How can you make surprise feel authentic and organic and not for shock value? What is the theme that you're exploring, right? There are, of course, logistical questions and challenges like timing and conflict and ego. All of these come into play when you think about this idea of communion. And that is the thing that keeps me interested, but also activated and constantly trying to create something that feels fresh and new.
So let's talk about you a little in terms of your past magazine work. Professionally, how did you get to this point?
My first full-time job in New York City, I worked for a amazing publicist who has a reputation for being incredibly tough. And we're still very good friends. Her name is Kelly Catrone. She told me, she was like, Josh, you're a terrible assistant, but you're a great writer. And she was really one of the first people that really, one, unlocked the idea that you could work at a magazine. I remember fantasizing over magazines when I grew up in the suburbs, but she was the one that showed me working at a parent agency. I understood what working at a magazine actually meant. And she was one that really pushed me to do that. My first magazine job was at a magazine called Black Book Magazine, which no longer exists today, but Black Book was like the quintessential cool New York magazine for a long time. I covered a mix of everything. I was an assistant. I mostly did like front of book stuff and some online newsletter stuff, but it was a really great way to understand the politics of a very amorphous industry, but also understand the business side. I remember when I started working at Black Book, within the first week, it was acquired by another company. And then that company acquired 3 other magazines. So we went from being in an office of 1 magazine to being an office of 4 magazines. And each magazine, each team was incredibly different. And my role changed, me being the lowest of the low in the masthead, changed my scope, and my role changed several times, from working just on Black Book to working on all of them in different capacities. And at this time, I was 21, maybe understanding how, as someone in the media industry, in a time when media was being rethought, you have to become a chameleon, right? Because Black Book was a very specific kind of brand. It was a very specific audience. But then our sister brand was a magazine called Vibe Magazine, which is a historically Black magazine. It's historically about hip hop. I started as a sort of fashion entertainment writer, and now I'm doing hip hop coverage, right? So understanding the difference in my relationship with their editors and understanding the difference in the audience and understanding the difference in tone, that was a really formative experience. And when I eventually got laid off, I also understood the realities of the industry. You can be the coolest magazine, you can have the coolest cover, but if you're not succeeding in whatever financial means, whether it's print revenue or experiential or just as a business, as a commercial business, then your magazine won't last. And that was 15 years ago. And I think about that every minute of every day, right? I'm happy with making a really successful and creative project, but we also have to be a viable business. And those are the 2 most important things for us, is thoughtfulness, but also longevity.
So you have talked about the business you've created around family style, which encompasses events and social content and event production and the magazine, but you've called the magazine the purest expression of the brand.
Yeah.
It's the brand as aspirational thing, and it also becomes a calling card for the company.
Yeah, 100%. I say, especially when we're talking to non-media people or I had to raise money to start the brand. I talk to a lot of my friends don't work in this industry. I try to explain it. The magazine is our brand expression. It represents fully the intention, the thoughtfulness, the pillars of the brand to 100%. And we have almost laborious conversations about everything we do for the magazine, because everything needs to be the best of the best that it can be. Because again, it's permanent. We're not a monthly magazine. You don't flip through it, throw it away. We're not based off the TV schedule or award shows where we have the benefit of being ephemeral or temporary, right? Everything we do is meant to be collectible in terms of the print magazine. And I want the brand to be more than just a season, for more than just a year. And I've worked in past roles between print, digital, and a mix. And I'm lucky to understand both landscapes. So I would never say that I'm only a print person, I'm only a digital person. But what I understand and what I value the most about creating a print product is this idea of endurance and of longevity. And so we do take our time, and we do consider everything incredibly, almost laboriously long, as I was saying before, because it really is us at our heart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I agree with you that a magazine in a multimedia environment, the magazine is the purest expression because like I said, it lasts the longest. It's not a throwaway product. So as I was researching you, one idea kept popping up And that was you saying that you have this deep love for magazines. Where does that come from?
If I'm being honest, and I actually wrote about this in our next issue's edit letter, it's always this idea of escapism. I think, listen, I didn't have a terrible adolescence. I didn't have the best adolescence. I think I had a fine adolescence for growing up with a single mom. We were lower middle class. I was the only person that I knew in my suburban town that lived in an apartment. But having watched my mom struggle, and a lot of years we weren't able to turn the AC on because it was too expensive. So having seen her go through that, having watched her not just stretch a penny, but morph it into the longest linear shape a penny could be, I think I always craved this idea of another world, the world that we saw on TV or in movies or read about in glossy magazines. And back to your point about print, the storytelling that a magazine allows you to do, and I'm not just talking about a luxury story or about a beautiful car and a beautiful hotel. I'm just talking about this idea of permanence. It always spoke to me. It always was like, wow, one day in one place, I could have this. I also love this idea of consideration and of time. I went to film school in college, and I realized I hated making movies because it was almost too considered. You would spend minimum 2 years, sometimes 5, 6 years making this product that was overanalyzed and dissected like a surgery to a point that it ruined all sense of creativity. Whereas the pace of a magazine still allows that wonderful consideration and that the conversations and the thought process. But there is a hard cutoff. There's a hard deadline that you have to respect. Yes, you can push the deadline by a week, right? Don't tell our advertisers that. You can fudge that a little bit by days, but if we're going to print in December, we're going to print in December. We're not printing in January because that will ruin literally everything. And so I think having grown up with this sort of fantasy of it and then working and understanding that it represented or that it fostered creativity, but with disciplines or with roadblocks that fostered more creativity and more creative challenges, I think I really just, the more and more I worked in it, the more and more I began to love it. I love the feeling of going to a printer and smelling the paper when it goes to press. I love the weirdness of touching the cardboard box. I don't know if you have that. Certain people have this sort of affectation where like the touch of cardboard, like it gives them the shivers, and I have that, and I hate it, but I also love it because inside that cardboard box is a magazine that we spent 6, 7 months working on and poring over and sweating over and crying. I love the chaotic emails about distribution and shit, we didn't make the boat, so the magazine's going to be a week late. And what is that going to mean for everything? It is, don't get me wrong, it's a total nightmare, but it's almost a fantasy inside that nightmare because what we're doing is something I wholly believe in. I've worked at places where I didn't believe in the product. And that situation, no matter what industry, I don't think it's a healthy thing because you're not in it, right? Right now, I have the benefit of truly living, breathing, being family style, but also enjoying it. So it is a win-win for me, even though it is very stressful.
There are people who love the assembly of it, but it's also a massive pain in the ass. But so someone who admits that they love making a magazine is maybe saying more about them than they care to admit.
Yeah, even this morning, I grew up competitively swimming until this morning. I went swimming at 5 a.m. and our Livings editor, Beverly, texted me. She goes, you love punishing yourself. Why are you swimming at 5 a.m. the day after Halloween? We just closed an issue. What are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I do think there is a certain sadomasochist element to it. I don't like suffering, but I do love the gratification of spending so much time and energy and effort into something, and then it comes out and you're so happy with it. I think it'd be another conversation, like I was saying before, if I didn't like what I was doing. But I think to make it through the fire and you're there and you're at this sort of Garden of Eden, whatever the metaphor is, you can enjoy it. It makes the oasis even better, sweeter, brighter, what metaphor you want to use.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Jeremy Leslie at Mag Culture. We're proud to support The Full Bleed because we love magazines too. Visit magculture.com and see why print is far from over. It's just getting started. Read the journal for interviews and reviews, listen to our podcasts, visit our shop in London and online, and come to our live events in London and New York. We love magazines. Subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates, all at magculture.com.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org.
I kept this quote from, I think it's your first editorial, and it's about your mother's fridge. You say, I grew up Vietnamese, but the concept of her country, meaning your mother's country, of being there and of leaving it is something I could not, nor will ever comprehend. Our home was her home, but hers was not mine. How strange it is to know something so well, yet also feel completely alien to it. I think just based on everything you've said, that's the start, that image.
100%.
And it is in your first editorial. And the picture, there was a picture of the fridge, which is not something you would expect in a magazine that is relatively glossy.
Yeah, it confused a lot of our advertisers. They're like, what are we doing? It goes back to what I was saying before about the Vietnamese food, but it also, I think, speaks to my experience as a capital B broke 17-year-old in New York City to everyone's experience. Even going to a fashion show now, I've been to thousands of fashion shows. Everyone has this imposter syndrome for whatever reason. I had it being raised in a Vietnamese household, being surrounded by Vietnamese culture, but not feeling Vietnamese and not looking Vietnamese, not understanding where I fit in. And I think we have this sort of imposter syndrome. Everyone wants to fit in some kind of way. I'm not saying everyone wants to be popular or cool, but everyone wants to feel like they know where they're a part of. And I think I have struggled with that in different ways, whether it's through racial and ancestry culture, whether it's through navigating the art world. The art world is historically dominated by wealth. And I grew up, I think the only thing we had on the walls of my mom's apartment was like my report card, right? We didn't collect art. And so going to galleries and wearing, let's say, maybe a 2-year-old Uniqlo shirt as a 19-year-old, I'm like, how do I fit into this world? Can I even get into this world? And so years later, to be working with these galleries, I used to be terrified of even stepping foot into, not even knowing you could even look into a gallery. I still have imposter syndrome. I still oftentimes feel like Tom Bribley, where it's like, do I belong here? I think everyone feels that way. I think you could ask the most important stylists, the biggest who's, and we all have that self-doubt. I think it's what we do with that, how we treat other people, how we move in those rooms, knowing that we all have this insecurity and this question dictates the future. I try to recognize when there's conflict, when there's disagreements, when there's egos, a lot of it comes from that. And that's how we approach a lot of our stories, with this sense of innate humanity. We all know people have all these things brewing, insecurities, questions, doubts.
What would you say Family Style is as a brand? What's your elevator pitch on the brand?
Our elevator pitch is we are a art and fashion brand at the intersection of food and culture. So bottom line is we use food as a metaphor to explore contemporary art, fashion, design. We're not an Epicurean brand. So we do have one recipe in the magazine every issue, but we're not about how to make a lasagna, right? It's never going to be that. It's not a home magazine. We explore what does home mean, but we're not about cooking or home or decorating. And that's a big misconception, I think, when people hear that you're a food magazine. The other misconception is that people think we're a parenting magazine because of the name Family Style. A lot of Europeans specifically, they don't understand the colloquial phrase. So I always explain why food is something, as we were discussing, food is something that everyone understands. Food is something that touches everyone. Everyone has to eat food. Most people, not everyone, but most people like eating food, right? There is a minority of people that have no taste, that just eat food for efficiency purposes, for function, right? Or a lot of athletes that are either like bulking or not, it's just for function. But for the most part, people like food, but it's also personal, right? It's the food you make for your family, the food I make for my family, it's all very different. The food that I stress eat when I get home is different than the food that you eat for dessert. So to have that really beautiful dichotomy of universality, but also ubiquity, that's a really important thing. And that exists throughout the creative industries, and it allows us to explore it, right? Art being the sort of high concept, unapproachable concept thing that I talked about with its pearly white gates, through the lens of food, it becomes more accessible, it becomes more democratic. Same with fashion, same with design. It's a sort of device that allows us to broach these hard to access, hard to reach, hard to navigate topics, and do so with a little warmth and a little tongue in cheek.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking of that. Kate Moss didn't say it first, but she did say it, that nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, which I just hated that quote so much. Like on the cover of the issue I have in front of me, it says arts and culture with a taste for more, which you have been saying. In the magazine, you described it as Fantasy Style as a fantasy dinner party in the form of a quarterly arts and culture journal. The section heads in the magazine are food related or dinner party related, and they lead up to a recipe. And sometimes the recipe is actually quite simple. I think in the one I have, it's a cook.
Exactly. Chase Sweet Wonders is a cookie.
It's a oat cookie, which is a funny way to end it. It is dessert, but it's also, you've gone through quite a lot of very expensive, very lavish, lovely fashion spreads and shoots, and then you end up with a cookie. So that curation, editing is curation, but you can sense, if you look at the magazine carefully, you can get the idea of this sort of chaotic, really swish dinner party.
Yeah, exactly. Because isn't that life, right? I think even like when I'm in a room that's mostly fashion people, sure, we're talking about who's going to Chanel, what's happening at Celine. I guess now we know it's Michael Ryder at Celine. What's happening, gossip, rumors. Oh my God, Heidi Klum wearing the ET costume, which was amazing. But we're also talking about where'd you go to dinner last night? What are you watching right now? Did you see the new Luca Guadagnino movie? I think every niche audience or subset wants to be cross-categorical because that's what life is. If you think about it from a business sense, which is a lot of my thinking now, and when I talk to brands, the fashion consumer, the VIP Louis Vuitton shopper, the Fendi woman who is being flown from New York to Milan to go to the Fendi showroom, they're also decorating their houses, plural, with B&B Italia and floss lighting. They're also staying at the Mark Hotel in New York City and Il Pelicano in Tuscany, right? They're also eating at the best restaurants and maybe the most unknown restaurants. So we live in this hyper blurred culture where fashion is lifestyle and everyone wants the best of it. We want to be wearing the best things. We want to be eating at the best places, and we want to be interested in interesting. And so the magazine is intentionally assembled. So we do have a structure where there's 3 different sections that fall as a sort of imaginary menu. Aperitivo is our traditional front of book, and that is meant to evoke the feeling of when you go to a cocktail party and you're like, oh, Arjun, did you hear about Alexander Fury's amazing fashion collection, right? It's a light bite. It's a small little thing. We're not going to get into it. You don't need to sit down. It's a light conversation. We try to cover our different interests, being fashion, art, design, culture. The second course is when you're at the table. It's called dinner service. It's when you're really talking. It's, oh my God, did you see this amazing movie? I can't believe they talked about. And then you really go into it. And when you look at the way dinner service is assembled, we don't follow the conventional interview, fashion, 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 because that to me is so boring. The OCD part of me, which my designers will tell you, is I love having the rubric of the 3 courses, but inside that we have the chaos of life, because that's how conversations happen. You go from talking about Gwyneth Paltrow to macaroni to Severance coming up next season to, oh my God, what are you doing for Christmas? We bounce back and forth. We interrupt each other. We're chaotic. We're silly. And that's how I want the magazine to be. I want to see an amazing fashion special, and then I want to talk about important topics. And I want levity, but also substance. And that's why we have that sort of unbalanced back-to-back lineup. And then the end is called Something Sweet. And that's meant to be a relief at the end of a long, lovely night. We always start with some kind of really beautiful community story. I think the issue you have is a exquisite property called Casa d'Amasuro, which is a never before seen iconic house in Tuscany that is shaped like a dinosaur. And the story that Laura Reisman writes is talking about how this really radical house that was untouched and left to waste has become a pillar of unaccepted radical design, which is lovely. And then we have 16 artist commissions where it's like going to a group show and seeing a mix of different arts in a gallery, right? Everything in the magazine is original to us. So we invite artists to create a work in response to the issue theme. And then the last page is a recipe because We're not a food magazine, but ultimately we are in a little bit. So I thought it was a nice way to end this sort of dinner with a takeaway, right? Be it an oat cookie, be it something more complicated. And it's also a great way to relate to a kind of talent that you might not otherwise relate to. Chase Wonders is an amazing young actress. A lot of people don't know her. My mom doesn't know her, right? So to understand her favorite recipe, it's a nice way to open the door and then get to know her more.
You mentioned the business a few times. Are the advertisers in your magazine, are they doing anything else with you? Are they present in the experiential aspect or the events, or how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole goal and the whole opportunity of the business. We are a niche company. Everything we do is incredibly considered. So we do things strategical. We don't do 360 programming with everyone. We do it with select partners. But the goal of the company and what we've been able to do really successfully throughout this calendar year is to create 360 partnerships that either start or culminate with a magazine. So whether it is an amazing fashion editorial or a really cool fat feature or something in between that and have a really interesting presence in the print magazine. Digital and social is our most powerful tool. We're still a niche audience. I think our Instagram is like 55,000. We're not Rihanna, we're not Kendall Jenner, but those 55,000 people are some of the most important people in culture, right? Artists, designers, photographers, like really influential people that I'm super proud of that we're creating content for on our Instagram, on our website, and our newsletters, and then bringing it to life through experiential events that use like the magazine, like the social, that use food as a core medium. So we've been able to do this with our fashion partners, with our wine and spirits partners. We're not exclusive to one category. I actually love the diversity of partners that we work with, from a Moet Hennessy to a Richemont, a fine jeweler. I love the diversity of it. The whole goal with everything from the events to the editorial is that everything feels very different. So the very first dinner we had was with Banana Republic Home to launch their new home category, which is incredibly chic furniture. We did it at 11 Madison Park, which is a 3-star Michelin restaurant, the only plant-based restaurant to have 3 Michelin stars. It was amazing. I won't lie to you. It was very fancy, capital F fancy, white tablecloths, like multi-tens of thousands of dollars of florals. Very nice dinner, right? Lots of famous people, lots of photos. The second dinner we had was a barbecue in the street of Savannah, Georgia. So I love having that dichotomy of, we're not elitists. We like nice things, but we like simple things too. It's all about people ultimately. We also try to have everything spaced out throughout the year and around the world, right? So from New York to Savannah to Napa Valley to Milan to California, I love that idea of, we're not always where you think we are. Not everything we do is the exact same. The through line is a sense of community. The through line is a luxury experience. I say luxury, but I don't mean elitist, right? So this dinner that we did in Savannah, Georgia, it was amazingly produced, but it was not fancy. We were eating cornbread, drinking whiskey. It wasn't something black tie by any means. I wore jeans and sneakers, but it was just expertly produced and had the coolest people. And to be able to do both, right? To be able to be at the capitals and in the unexpected is a real win for us, because I never want to be the place, the people that are only going to the black tie places. That's so against the core of our brand and of me as a person. I love the diversity. I love the spectrum. I love the surprise.
Advertising and partnerships are just two brands leveraging each other. So,
Exactly.
yeah. We always end with your 3 favorite magazines. So what are you most excited about right now?
My favorite magazine in the world, and everyone at this magazine knows that. So if anyone's listening to it, it will not be a surprise. I love T Magazine. I think Hanya, who's the editor-in-chief, is a genius. I think Patrick Lee, the creative director, is one of the most talented creative directors and also one of the nicest people alive. I think the entire fashion team, from Kate to Angela to all the stylists they work with, are just top tier. Nick Haramis, who is a featured editor at large, as is Kurt Soller. They're just the smartest, wittiest, nicest guys. I have nothing but praises to say to T Magazine, and I really love what they're doing. I think, not to pick another magazine related to a newspaper, but I think M. de la Monde is fabulous in Paris. I think it's been around for a bit, but I think the last 5 years has been so exciting and fresh and just really beautiful. And I think my third favorite magazine is System Magazine, which is in London. It's a very fashion magazine. I do know all three founders have recently left the magazine, so I am curious to see how that changes. I think when System started, it was shockingly amazing. And when I worked at Document Journal, I was like, wow, they're like a lap ahead of us, to use a swimming term. We have to catch up. They're lapping us, right? They're just doing it and it's so chic. And I think what I respect the most about System, which I try to do in our way at Family Style, is that System has a very elevated minimalism to it. It's not overtly designed. It's not overtly fussy. It's very straight to its core. And I love that. And it's so confident in that minimalism. And it's something I really respect.
I always appreciate talking to someone who admits that the magazine is the center of their universe. I've used the solar system or universe metaphor with other editors on this program, and they're really leery of putting it there because they're thinking of everything else that they do. And I'm like, no, it's still the core, and you say it. So thanks for that.
This has been The Full Bleed, a podcast about the future of magazines and the magazines of the future. The Full Bleed is a production of Magazium LLC. This episode was produced by Patrick Mitchell. If you'd like to comment on the show or just, start a conversation, send me an email at hello@magazium.co or visit our website at magazium.co, where you can read transcripts of all of our interviews along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and more. We've got a swag shop too. And a reminder to those of you who still read fiction, my next novel, The Reads, is out in October and available for pre-order just about everywhere. My name is Arjun Basu. Thanks very much for listening. Welcome to the future.